We're going to consider for a little while today more of the Lord's answer to Habakkuk. He said a great deal more than one would have anticipated. And we want to look at this very, very carefully. Please bear in mind that this prophet, referred to as a minor prophet, did have a remarkable and wonderful concept of who God is and a deep concern for God's reputation. A lesson to all of us. And as we've mentioned earlier, when you hear the term major prophets or minor prophets, do not assume that the word minor means a prophet of lesser importance. Doesn't mean that at all. It means that his work was shorter. The amount that he wrote was a lot less than that of the major prophets. So it does not mean that one prophet was inspired more than another or knew more than another, but that some had a longer book and others had a shorter book. Habakkuk was deeply concerned for God's reputation. This is one of the high marks of true piety. Here we have the evidence of a devoted man who is not only devoted, but he's understanding of who God is and what God's purposes are, as expressed in today's bulletin. Yea, even now in the song that we just heard, that thrilled our hearts, God's theme is to honor himself, to glorify himself, and to make all intelligences know who he is. Not only the winners, but the losers. Not only the saints, but the sinners. Not only Israel, but the Gentiles. Not only the ancient chosen people, but the church of Jesus Christ. Not only the good, but the bad. It is his purpose and it is his aim in all that he does to glorify himself and to defend the integrity of his reputation as a God who cannot lie, a God who cannot deceive, and a God who cannot be limited in anything that he purposes to do. And that ultimately, every intelligence, wherever that intelligence may be in the universe, will have to acknowledge who he is. And as you go on into the New Testament, you find that this honor and this glory is being focused upon the Son of God, the Lord Jesus Christ. For it is written about him that before him every knee shall bow, of things on the earth, things under the earth, and every tongue will have to confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. In other words, the Son of God is going to have the glory and the honor, and this will glorify the Father as well. Now this concerned Habakkuk, because here were some real problems. The little nation of which he was a part and to which he ministered was the little nation of Judah. Actually, it was just a fragment of what had once been a strong, powerful, glorious nation, as in the days of David and Solomon. Now there's very little left. And that nation had become increasingly sinful, bowing down to idols, worshiping statuary and imaginary gods and deities. That nation had also turned to strong drink, and its leaders were constantly inebriated. Not only that, but this nation had begun to dishonor God in a most insulting way by going through the religious festivals, just as we have our so-called Christian festivals of Easter and so forth. So they had theirs. And going through all of those festivals and ceremonies as if their heart was in it. But their heart was not in it. It was just something to do. It was perfunctory. And this was most insulting to God. Not only that, but they had added to their guilt the terrible crimes of immorality and sodomy and adultery, a way of life. God could not long tolerate that, and yet they were his people. He had called them. He had chosen them. And then from time to time, their leaders sought to enter into contracts and under the table deals with other national nations and their leaders, hoping thereby to maintain some kind of tranquility, if possible peace, not relying upon a great God. And then I mention again how insulting it was for them, while going through religious festivals that had been ordained by Moses, to at the same time and in a more persistent way worshiping idols, gathering under every green tree. They were to be punished. They needed to be punished. Now how? Now God had said that they cannot be exterminated. God had said that they cannot be exterminated. They've got to exist, however small in number, so that the prophet could say, "We die not because of who thou art." And yet this nation has to be punished. And punishment should be considered in the light of the offense. The punishment should equal the offense. Now then, their offense is so great that they do not deserve to live. They do not deserve to be a nation. They do not deserve to live on the earth. That's how great their offense is. Now then, how can God, who has promised that this nation will live, punish them as they deserve? They deserve to be punished. Connected with this going on in his own mind, as he's concerned about God's reputation and God's honor, is this. The prophecy was given, and we have part of it here, of a mighty avalanche, as it were, like a tidal wave of military power coming down, sweeping over them, from the Chaldean Empire. Because as they moved on and conquered nation after nation, they strengthened their own armed forces by bringing captured ones and slaves into their service. Who could stop them? But they were a wicked nation, a very wicked nation indeed. How then is God going to straighten this thing out? How can he allow a people so wicked, a leadership so corrupt, and an empire that is so given over to idolatry, to competitive gods, competitive religions, to allow that wicked people to conquer God's chosen people? Oh, they deserve to be punished, all right. But if they were to be punished what they deserve, they would cease to exist. How is he going to do that? And if they're going to be punished, why should they be punished by a nation that is so bad and so evil, a nation that does not itself deserve to exist. How is God going to revive his work in the midst of the years? How is he going to manifest himself? And how is he going to justify what he does? And how is he going to defend his holy name? Now, this was not mere curiosity, you understand. This is not mere curiosity. I guess all of us, certainly every pastor and every Sunday school teacher, and I think most of us as parents, have had the experience of people without any depth of thought and without any real feeling whatsoever ask questions out of curiosity. You know, how come and why? But this wasn't shallow at all. This was deep, because this man, called of God to speak in the name of God, found himself in a dilemma. He had absolute confidence in God. God was just. God was holy. God was true. But how could he defend his name, which implies justice and truth and equity, as you have it in the Psalms? Handle all of these international events, be supreme, and come out not only victor, but his name unsullied. And God begins to answer. Habakkuk puts himself in a place spiritually, mentally, maybe even in his imagination, where he would be concentrating only on what impressions or what words the Lord would give him. He says, I'll stand upon my high tower, a vantage point where I can see things more clearly and appreciate what I know he's going to point out to me. Just like a military commander who wants to be on an elevation, on a hill, on a high place where he can see more clearly. And then will appreciate the details of the communication that is being given him. And so God begins to answer him. We begin our study now in verse 5, where God gives reasons for the Chaldeans to be punished. And here the Chaldeans are personified in their commander. You know, speaking about he. Now this is not unusual in literature. We do it all the time. The newspapers do it all the time. The newscasters on the TV do it all the time. You hear it said, for example, that Washington went. Well, who went? Or the White House said, and so forth. And you have terms like that. And we often use the term Uncle Sam and so on. Now, here the Chaldeans are personified in their commander. Beginning in verse 5, you'll notice that heavy drinking was characteristic of the Chaldean aristocracy. And note, dominated by wine, the leader becomes proud and reckless and does not stay home, but ventures forth as a greedy marauder and is never satisfied, and he destroys or enslaves one nation after the other. Now we'll read it in verse 5. Yea, also because he transgresseth by wine, he's a proud man, neither keepeth at home, who enlargeth his desire as hell, and is as death, and cannot be satisfied, but gathereth unto him all nations, and heapeth unto himself, or unto him all people. Then in verse 6, the cry for vengeance by the oppressed is here used to echo, as it were, the very righteous indignation of the Lord himself. You see how the Lord, don't miss this, how the Lord in his righteousness identifies himself with the righteous indignation of the oppressed ones. And for God pronounces woe, meaning sorrow, to the wicked. And the taunting, you'll notice that. How long? Implies that the wicked conqueror won't have his way indefinitely. How long are you going to let him get away with it? And you read that he ladeth himself with clay. You know, precious metals like gold and silver dug out of the earth. Precious, aren't they? Gold, silver, dug out of the earth. Will have no more value than clay when death has taken over man. Well, let's read it. Verse 6. Shall not these take up a parable against him, and a taunting proverb against him, and say, woe to him that increaseth that which is not his? How long? And to him that ladeth himself with thick clay. You know, when he's buried in the earth, what's there? What's there? He may have had a lot of gold and silver, but that's it. And he personifies the nation. In verses 7 and 8, you have the descendants of the sufferers, the nations being conquered, and this, of course, will include Judah. They will in time rise up, and they're going to put the bite on their oppressor because of the wanton slaughter and his arrogant rule. And you know, this took place. I love history. Oh, I remember in high school, we had a teacher, and I have never listened to such a dull person in my life since. He was dull. And he made history so unpleasant and so burdensome that it's a remarkable thing that any of us ever passed. And yet I think history is wonderful. I love to teach history. And I find that in Bible history, you have God's record and what God is teaching. God is revealing who he is and so forth, and that makes it even more fascinating. And then to know that God is sovereign. The Lord is in his holy temple all the time. Now the affairs on earth. Oh, what a wonderful place to be in, where you can look down upon the affairs of the earth and not feel yourself all caught up in all the mess. And here you have a description of the descendants of the sufferers, the next generation. Because you know, a nation has a national memory. A nation has a national memory. Things that they remember from the past. We have Indians in America today that have a national memory, in the sense that there's been handed down, there's tradition, there's repetition. There are things that are brought to the attention of each successive generation, the atrocities of the white man against the Indian and so forth. And many of the problems that you have in the north of Ireland and so forth, between the so-called Protestants and the so-called Catholics, it's due to the fact of national memory, where one generation after the other has been bred on hate and lived on hate and has been taught hate and has not recognized that whatever wrong there may have been in the way past, we've got to do better now and so forth. Well, in this national memory, these people will rise up in time, and they're going to be like a wasp to sting the very conqueror that has ruled them so wantonly. Verses 7 and 8, shall they not rise up suddenly, that shall bite thee, and awake that shall vex thee, and thou shalt be for booties unto them, because thou hast spoiled many nations, all the remnant of the people shall spoil thee, because of men's blood, and for the violence of the land, of the city, and of all that dwell therein. Then in the next few verses you have a retribution for covetousness. You see what God is revealing here. God is revealing to here that when an oppressed people are crying out because of the slaughter and the evil that has been done to them, God sees it, and that God has the same opinion of the conqueror, although his opinion is holy and supreme and transcendent. I'd like to read the next few verses, beginning in 9. Woe to him that coveteth an evil covetousness to his house, that he may set his nest on high, that he may be delivered from the power of evil. Thou hast consulted shame to thy house by cutting off many people, and hast sinned against thy soul. For the stone shall cry out of the wall, and the beam out of the timber shall answer it. There's going to be wreckage, ruins, and those ruins will speak loudly of the judgment of God upon this conqueror. Then he has more to say on the judgment, on ill-gotten gain, beginning in verse 12. That is, to build on violence and bloodletting brings the Lord's wrath. You see, it's part of the answer to Habakkuk. God may allow it now, but God's going to have his turn, and the Chaldean gain is to be burnt up. Beginning in verse 12. Woe to him that buildeth a town with blood, and establisheth a city for iniquity. Behold, is it not of the Lord of hosts that the people shall labor in the very fire, and the people shall weary themselves for very vanity? And then, leaving verse 14 for the moment, that we might concentrate on it after, because this is like a special emphasis inserted here. We go to 15. Just like the awful disgrace of intoxication, and the more grievous transgressions of inducing another to drink, so the Chaldean king's thirst for war allured neighbor states to obtain booty. That is, because he was successful, he got away with it. It encouraged other states that have not been yet touched by him to be greedy and reach out. And just as the drunkard becomes vile and shameless, indecent and vomiting, so shall the Chaldean power go down in disgrace under God's judgment. And God is saying, in effect, you treated men like beasts. Now you're going to have it. Let me read, beginning in 15 through 17. Woe unto him that giveth his neighbor drink, and putteth the bottle to him, and makest him drunken also, that thou mayest look on their nakedness. Thou art filled with shame for glory. Drink thou also, and let thy foreskin be uncovered. The cup of the Lord's right hand shall be turned unto thee, and shameful spewing shall be on thy glory. For the violence of Lebanon shall cover thee, and the spoil of beasts which made them afraid, because of men's blood, and for the violence of the land, of the city, and of all that dwell therein. And then follows the God's righteous condemnation on idolatry. And you see how God is step by step revealing his honor, his integrity, his justice. He's not passing over the evils of this people, and not at all. And now that which is so offensive to God a competitive religion, a heathen god that they serve. Notice this condemnation in idolatry in verses 18 and 19. What profiteth the graven image, that the maker thereof hath graven it, the molten image, and a teacher of lies, that the maker of his work trusteth therein, to make dumb idols? Woe unto him that said to the wood, Awake, and to the dumb stone, Arise, it shall teach. Behold, it is laid over with gold and silver, but there is no breath at all in the midst of it. Here's God's condemnation on idolatry, because it is wicked as well as being very, very foolish. To rely on or to pray to an idol, even if it is overladen with gold, it cannot save. And Babylon's gods cannot deliver the Chaldeans from the wrath of God. Habakkuk, you're getting your answer. You're getting your answer. Chaldea will have her comeuppance. The wrath of God's going to be visited upon this people, and God is showing Habakkuk one item after another, that provokes the Almighty to wrath. They're not going to escape. Now let's look at those 3 verses, if we will. The last one, but the Lord is in his holy temple, let all the earth keep silence before him. We can go to the 4th verse first, 4:14 and 20. The just shall live by his faith, in verse 4. May I mention again that so far as we know, the only Old Testament phrase on faith quoted more than 2 times in the New Testament is this one. It is quoted 3 times in the New Testament. We saw that in our earlier study, did we not? In Romans, in Galatians, and in Hebrews. And I mention it again because someone may have been absent. The just shall live by faith is the way it's quoted in the New Testament. And of course it refers to the faith of the individual. In Romans, the emphasis is on the just, the righteous, how to become righteous before God. Then in Galatians, the emphasis is on the just shall live. The life, the continuance shall live. The perseverance shall live. And then in Hebrews, you have the very nature and quality of the faith. Faith is really taking God at his word, relying on it, and acting accordingly, even to waiting. The just shall live by his faith. You know, there were dark days coming for Judah. Dark days. The enemy would overrun. The slaughter would be great. The royalty destroyed. The marvelous and beautiful temple that had stood there for so long and really was one of the wonders of the world of those days lies in ruins and ashes. And the remnant of the people that escaped are taken captive into Babylon. What is left of what was once a great nation is now a pile of ashes. Now what's the righteous going to do? How is the righteous going to survive the scourge How can he put up with it? How can he stand it? He sees the things that he loved and desired and hoped for crushed. And he himself is taken away from his farm, from his business, whatever he had, and he's transported to another country where they're worshiping all kinds of gods. And there he has to try to make a living. Is he going to keep his faith in God? Is he going to keep on trusting in God? The God who promised that just as surely as there are seasons of spring and summer, fall and winter, so there will be descendants of Jacob, a remnant of Israel. You see, what's going to keep him going? The just shall live by his faith. And when he sees that it's the enemy that has conquered, the wrong people are on top, how is he going to stand it? He'll live by faith that God is going to vindicate his own honor and ultimately compel all men to see it. And that brings us to verse 14. For the earth shall be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. Habakkuk, here's your answer. You live by faith. It's not going to be pleasant for you to see, but eventually you're going to see what God's going to do. You're going to see that. For the earth shall be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. You go to the seabed, every bit of it is covered with water. There isn't a bit of the seabed but what has got water on it. So general is going to be the knowledge of the glory of God. That's his honor, his majesty, you see. And naturally I was thinking of this as the choir was singing, because it was the theme that was, circulating through my faculties. And the day is going to come. There's no question about it. And of course, that would mean the restoration of Israel. There would be the bringing in, as we saw last Sunday evening, the uniting of what was once two nations, Israel and Judah, now one, under one king, the Lord Jesus Christ, in the restored city of Jerusalem, and so forth. All that is included. Then we go to the 20th verse. But the Lord is in his holy temple. Let all the earth keep silence before him. Habakkuk, you've been asking some questions. Not out of curiosity, but out of real concern. But I want to say to all the rest of the earth, shut up. Don't ask questions. Don't come with any arguments. I have declared myself, says the Lord. These are my purposes, and I will do it. And my temple in the glory shall not be crushed. The temple of Solomon. The temple of Solomon is going to fall. There won't be anything there but rubbish in a very short time when the armies of Nebuchadnezzar overflow the city. But I'm in my temple. A temple not made with hands, eternal in the heavens. And I'm there. And I'm sovereign. And I'm on top. Habakkuk, you've asked some good questions. Here are my answers. Now what's your response? Do you remember at the time that he said that he was going to put himself on a watchtower and see what was going to happen and listen to what God would point out to him? Then he added, and what I'm going to answer when he reproves me. In other words, what can I know that when he gets through talking to me, I'm not going to have any question whatsoever. And how am I going to answer? How am I going to respond? Well, chapter 3, that we'll be taking up shortly, is his answer. And it's really remarkable. It may be that we need to be reminded of the purposes of God in giving us the Bible. And I want to say this for what it's worth, and it's worth a lot, but not everybody knows it. That the main purpose of this book is to reveal who God is. Never forget that. Most people pick up the Bible as if they're picking up a book of Proverbs, looking for a phrase here or a sentence there that will suit their thinking or prove their point, or give them some instructions on shall we worship in Jerusalem, or shall we worship on Mount Gerizim, and how many candles shall we have during Lent, and all of that. Couldn't the Bible tell them this? This is what they're looking for. And God is saying, I want you to know who I am. In the beginning, God. You start there. And then throughout this wonderful book, in the recorded history, in the Psalms, in the prophecies, in the predictions, in his actions, and in his own statements, God is revealing who he really is. A number of years ago, in the days of the embryonic development of what was eventually to be called neo-evangelicalism, I sat in many a convocation, committees, in restaurants, in other informal gatherings with heads of denominations, educators of Christian colleges, and prominent pastors. And I began to recognize something was wrong. What was it? Something was wrong. What was it? I was young, comparatively young, impressionable, no doubt about that. Many of these men had more degrees than I had, except for body temperature. And I listened and began to have an effect on me. And yet I sensed something was wrong. Something was wrong. And one of the things that upset them so much, and it set the course and the determination for neo-evangelicalism, was this: that they did not know who God is. It wasn't until I got away from it, pulled away from it, and began to reflect, to think upon what I heard, not so much of what was preached from the platform, in great conferences, in the formation of the National Association of Evangelicals. But when they let their hair down and confessed and confided, as one man did, says, I cannot defend the God of the Old Testament, who does not prohibit harlotry, but provides restrictions and regulations. A God who allows women to be taken as captives in war and made into wives or slaves. Or a God who according to the record has killed thousands of people more than he has saved. I cannot defend such a God, is what was said. And to that they agreed. And they pulled away. They pulled away. And there was born the basic philosophy of a new approach to the Bible. And today, as you and I are meeting here, in this era, in this time, and in this part of this decade especially, in theological circles in seminaries across the country, the debate is raging and the believers are surrendering fast. And what is the subject? The inspiration and inerrancy of the Word of God. If it is inspired and if it is inerrant, then we don't like the God that we read about. And so, to satisfy our carnal concept of who God is, we have to modify our terms on inspiration. And we have to surrender our position on inerrancy. I know this sails over the head of some. But today there is a great deal of emphasis on separation, and there must not be compromise, and Christian men seem to be dedicated to just lambasting other men because they say they're compromisers in one thing or another, and oh, how I wish I could talk to them and say to them, brethren, I'm in agreement with you, I'm against compromise, I'm against flirtations with the evil one and all of that. But I wish I could take you with me and have you sit where I sat and listen to that which produced the new evangelicalism. For the new evangelicalism has no other way to go but the way of compromise. Because way back then, and it took me a few years to recognize it, they didn't know who God is. And they felt they could not defend him. So now they've had to philosophize. Is that the word? And come up with a God that suits their imagination. And therefore today, you'll notice that the great emphasis everywhere, not only in new evangelicalism, just everywhere, is on love. On love. On love. Not on justice. And I tell you, that's quite a charge. Because everybody's in favor of love. Who's going to argue against that? You see? And everybody likes the idea that God is love. And they're ignorant of who he is. And because of this emphasis on loving everybody, and God loves everybody, and God's tolerant of anything and everything and everybody, there is no justice in the land. There is no equity amongst the princes, and there is no truth among the prophets. That's what the word says way back there. And it's true today. You have to take him as he's revealed himself. And while there may be some questions arising, and good questions, but make sure they're good questions that have to do with his integrity. And he will answer your heart, and you'll be able to respond as Habakkuk did in the 3rd chapter, which we'll come to, I hope, next Lord's Day. Oh, we're going to be in Habakkuk again tonight. another link in the chain. Lord, sanctify us in this thy truth, thy word.